Hey there guys, and welcome back. And welcome to the first episode in this new series, which is the development not blog for LiteLike. At least that's the title I'm going with right now. One of these things, on the topic of the title, obviously it's a play on roguelite and roguelike. That's what I was going for. I also figured because we're doing a space-themed thing here, Light, L-I-G-H-T, is a common theme in space sci-fi stuff, especially because obviously space is very dark. So I figured it worked on multiple levels. Normally how this series is going to work is I'll be doing this thing where I come over to the history tab over on Github, and then we'll go through the changes, and I'll pop back and forth between GitHub and Visual Studios, or VS Code rather. And we'll do it that way. This is the same exact format that I use for the stream animation program, so if you've watched the other videos, you should be familiar with this. Also, I should mention that I said not blog at the beginning there, because frankly, it seems a little weird to me to call this a blog, but it is what it is. It basically is a blog. The only difference is that I am doing this live, so any questions you have I can answer right away, etc. So, let's see. I guess the first thing to address is, if you are watching this live, the thumbnail that you saw was, let me pull it up, this right here. So, when I was setting up this stream at 4:30, I said, okay, you know what, I'm going to get this stream up before dinner. As we're recording right now, it's after dinner. But I said, okay, I'm going to get this stream up before dinner, and I went to make the thumbnail, and I was like, you know what? For the thumbnail, I would just like the logo, and that's it. Just put the logo large on the thumbnail, and have that be the pilot episode's thumbnail. Just a nice kickoff point. At which point, I had to find a font, and I started looking at fonts, and I started collecting fonts, and well, we still have a whole bunch of fonts, and it was no longer 4:30, it was now 5:20. So one of these things, I kind of obviously got a bit involved here, and since I got a bit involved, I figured, you know what, may as well just throw this out there. Now, one thing you may notice if you compare this to the current thumbnail, which the thumbnail will change to back to just the logo once we officially have that set, but I do have a fourth category here. I only had these three categories before. I forgot to sort out the not free fonts, the not for commercial use ones. One of those things, I personally would consider this personal use here because I'm not actually selling a game, but one of those annoying issues with copyright and whatnot, intellectual property, is technically you can make the argument if I make any money off of advertisements or, you know, any kind of thing. In theory, I'm making money off of quote-unquote the font. Not actually off the font, but people want their money and therefore they'll come after you. So I did sort these out. One of those deals, I'm going to run through all these fonts really quick, just give you a look at them. Nice up and close. And I'm kind of curious what you guys think look good. I have my own opinions. Unfortunately, most of my own opinions actually did end up in the not free fonts. But one of those things, if we decide that one font in the not free fonts looks especially good, then maybe when those things I reach out to whoever developed it and, you know, get license, etc. So let's just run through it really quick. As you can see, sharp fonts, alien fonts, other fonts. This was obviously mixed in with these three, but sharp fonts, as you can see, are fonts that are based on edges, and especially when you add in the fonts like this, you know, you definitely get the idea when you start looking at these fonts up here, what we're looking at. The alien fonts are supposed to look a little bit different, and then other fonts are just things I could not come up with a good label for that was coherent. So that is the setup for the fonts, and like I said, I just want to run through them really quick, get a good look at them, and get your guys' feedback. I do have all these saved, well, not all of them saved. I have them at the very least bookmarked so I can come back to them. And I did not put any names on them because I frankly just did not want the bias, any kind of bias here. So one of the things, I'm just going to scroll through, get it nice and big, and just keep in your mind whatever one you like and just comment. Feel free to comment on any of the fonts that you like. Actually, that was a little quick, wasn't it? So, all right. I think you've had enough look at those. We'll come over here. This toolbar, detach. There we go. Oh, that was just the brushes. Ignore what I'm doing over here. Pay attention to the fonts. Actually, I normally... yeah, whichever. Alright, we have a good look at those. Move on to these guys. And one of those things, because I do not have names on these fonts, you're probably the best way is just to say what category. So, for example, not free fonts, and then index number. We'll do 1 index instead of 0 index, just because, you know, I don't expect you guys to 0 index stuff. Alright, so that is all the fonts I picked out. Basically, I just typed in space fonts, went through 10 pages of results on 2 different sites, 10 pages each, and then then typed in sci-fi and went through significantly less. They actually had about half that for some reason on sci-fi. But I just, one of those things, ran through, picked things out that looked interesting. And again, I made my own decision on what ones I like, but I want your feedback because, frankly, most of the ones I like are over here. Not saying you shouldn't pick over here. If you pick over here, then that means everybody likes it, and therefore probably should just go with it. But one of those deals, and don't want to introduce any bias, so I'm not saying which ones I like. So that will bring us over to GitHub. And there we go. So as you can see, 2 days ago, I basically just got the GitHub set up. So I started the GitHub and then really quick added an HTML, just a very basic HTML page. And then yesterday I committed this. So if we come down to the README, that's where I'm logging my time. So yesterday I put an hour in the afternoon that I had. And then after lunch today, I put another hour. Again, kind of up in the air on how much time per session. You see this labeled session 1. How much time per session I want to do before we start explaining things. But got a decent amount done in the first 2 hours. It's one of those things, once we get to CSS and whatnot, content is going to be very slow coming. It's going to be a bit of a slog. So hop over to VS Code and let's actually look at the stuff, because I don't actually need the comparison tab because we have nothing to compare to. So as you can see here, I just set out some file structure to start off with and started working on this stuff. Now, one thing on day 1 in the first hour that took up a bit of my time was actually getting this extension, the Go Live. It's a live server extension. Yeah, live server. So normally, so I've got this set up as modules. Okay, I've got it set up as JavaScript modules. The once or twice that I've done that before, I've actually had them served off of servers, so it was no big deal. I tried to host this locally, just open HTML, open LiteLike.html, and it I got an error. I got a cross origin error, even though I was hosting it locally and the files were locally. But whatever. It's the HTML guys do what they do, so I accept it. And that means that I had to set up the live server so that I could actually, well, I didn't have to. I could have done it different ways, but I did some searching and came up with a live server, so that was a little bit of time in the first hour. And let's see, I started out with this. Now, with this actually, between hour 1 and hour 2, went through a bit of change. Because originally, I went really high level. I went like really abstract, I guess I should say. I went really abstract with stuff. And then at the beginning of hour 2, I went, you know what, I'm being a bit too opaque, a bit too oblique with how I'm doing this. And I rolled it back a bit. So, first thing I'll mention, because this is the first episode, is that since this is code I'm putting out there, right, I am trying to put as much comments as I can, and that is obviously taking up some of my coding time. I do include the comments as, you know, part of my time. I don't like go back and add comments after I'm done coding, so one of those things, it takes up time. Beyond that, let's go ahead and start looking at what I actually have accomplished. This right here, I realized when I was looking at the code really quick right before we went live, I forgot to include the Stack Overflow, so I will be adding that in here in a later version. I did steal this code off of Stack Overflow. I also stole, or this one, yeah. I adapted this code from Stack Overflow right here. One of those things I'm used to. It's a lot more useful to have a like now, especially for code that is only going to be run per session. So if you look here, I got this thing, this timing mechanism, the performance not now function. That is specific to the tab that's open. Now, if we think about our game, that we're basing this off of a dark room, the resource collection, the gather wood and the traps and inspect traps, those two things, you want those actually tied to global time or something of the like, just because you don't want the player to be able to reload the page and just instantly hit the gather. So gather, reload page, gather to constantly increase his resources. That's a bit of an exploit. So this would not work for that. However, this does work perfectly fine for combat, because if you reload into the middle of combat, guess what? Your state is not saved. Combat is stateless. So that works for this, and it makes it a lot easier than going into date and comparing dates and whatnot. So these are the utilities. This is my utility file. One of those things. Random choice is a useful function, so I've added it in there. Obviously, as I described, now is a useful function, and enumerate is useful for data types and whatnot. Entities was the first thing that I was working on. Technically, again, I went more abstract. I went to archetypes first, and I started playing with this idea of an archetype, and I abandoned that one. So one of these deals, that was, you know, maybe half an hour worth of code that I basically just straight up deleted. And now we just have entities here. And that gets extended by character. So entity obviously just has an ID, and it has roles, which we have enumerated up here. So these are just like token flags, etc. And one of those things, game mechanics can work off of whether or not a unit has a role and whatnot. Easy enough. And then obviously character. Character is something in combat. So for example, we would not, for the workers on the base, or, you know, however we end up describing this in game, so your town in a dark room, those are not actually people. Your population is not actually individual people. It's just numbers. It's just, I put this many points into gather wood, and, you know, it's basically just stat points is all it is. So you wouldn't bother making characters for this. This is useful for combat mostly, which is why, as I list here, it comes with combat statistics. So that is that. And obviously, once I started implementing combat statistics, then I decided to do weapons. Weapons were in this file originally, but I decided because it was labeled characters, we should probably move that out into its own file named weapons. If I had named this file entities, then I could make an argument that weapons could also be in here. But As it's labeled characters, it makes less sense. And I'm not going to change the label because frankly it's one of those things. If this was labeled entities and I started using that logic, this file would be like a bajillion lines long. So it's easier to just split this up. When I started right here, started thinking about what does a darkroom have, and one of those things, we're going to make it in the quote-unquote genre or style. So I'm going to use basically all the mechanics that are reasonable in a darkroom. And what that means is that we have damage. I actually have not noticed in a darkroom whether or not there is a damage range or if you always deal the exact same damage. So we'll have to investigate that or make a decision myself. It's one of those things. This is my game, so I can make it whatever I want. I don't necessarily need to follow a darkroom in terms of damage, whether or not damage is flat or variable. But it does have two interesting mechanics, which is cooldown. So obviously your weapon systems will have a cooldown, fire, rocket. Well, again, keep in mind that our theme for this game is not a post-apocalyptic scavenger game. This is a space-based mech game, and therefore our weapon systems in the mech have cooldowns. And then we also have this warm-up mechanic. So this I'm comparing to the bullet mechanic in a dark room. In dark room, for ranged weapons, you have a delay between when you shoot the weapon and when it hits the target. So that's the same idea here. I'm going to have a warm-up. And those are, you'll see this is called weapon type. So this is base statistics for specific weapons. And then the individual weapon instances will go ahead and keep track of cooldown and warm up. For example, the second you shoot a weapon, let's say, it tags the now. It calls, utils.now and tags, okay, it started cooldown at this time. And then it can compare that time, which is what happens right here, to this weapon type cooldown. There we go. So let's say that this is 100. Now is 100, and we fire the weapon at 50, right? So if 100 minus 50, which is 50, is greater than our weapon cooldown, then we can set cooldown to null. This actually is something I did not update. This is actually, I added these weapon state enumerations later, so I need to come back and fix this. So this would actually not be null. This would be weapon states not ready, but you get the idea. And then same thing. This is obviously this update state just checks cooldown and warm up and makes adjustments as necessary. So just again comparing, this is charging, the weapon's charging, it's warming up. So we compare the time to that. I did make this a separate function. This is all this function is going to look like is this, and the reason I did that is because I figure for displaying on the screen, it may be useful to be able to check how much time is remaining, whereas this .cooldown, it might also be useful, but I don't know. I didn't really think it was, honestly, at the time, but I may be wrong about that. Again, one of those things, I was trying to blitz through code as quickly as I could, so had not considered that I might also want the cooldown. So that is that. Yeah, again, the next part that I will be implementing into here is obviously the deal damage function. Well, this stuff right here, warm up remaining and cooldown remaining, I guess, would be something. But the actual deal damage function, which would then obviously take weapons off of charged and put them onto fired, so that they can be cycled back onto ready. And let's see. Anything else in here? I don't really think so. Got that. Game. I have never used seed random before, so I had to do some research on this. This was in the first hour, so again, this was some of that time that I spent in the first hour that didn't do much. But I did get it set up with a state here. So this would be a game state. As you can see, state true or state as an object here. And that will make it so that the game is predictable for a certain seed, which is useful for testing purposes. So I got that set up, and one of those things, if I hit the go live button right now, well, I think I got to come over here first, but as you can see, it would log, okay, here's game.random, here's the game state, and then here's game.random again, so that I can see that it comes up the same each and every time. Well, this is the random. This first random is different every single time, but this second one will be the same exact value each and every time. Point being. So that is that. So I got the game object with its pseudo random number generator implemented. And I believe that is everything. I threw this one in really quick. Random weapon. So one of those things, enemies attacking with random weapons, or if there's a status effect that causes you or your vehicle to fire randomly, maybe your mech gets hacked and therefore what weapon you're using is not necessarily, you don't necessarily know which weapon is going to be fired when you try hitting the buttons next. That's an interesting gameplay mechanic I was thinking about, so we implemented a random weapon. And yep. And that would be everything. Again, we're going to be making decent progress here at the beginning as we get everything set up. We'll be making significantly less progress when we get to CSS and strings. CSS obviously is just formatting, and formatting is always a bit of a pain in the butt in my experience, but that's just me. I'm sure there are people who do web design all the time and they're like, oh, CSS, easy. Not me. I don't do web design all the time, so CSS not easy. And then strings, I'm playing with this idea for strings where I kind of feel like tossing stuff through Google Translate and actually compiling whole entire dictionaries, not dictionaries, but whole entire enumerated files of localized strings to display instead so you can change language. That's just something I'm playing with right now in the back of my mind. Otherwise, one of these things, game dialogue, whatnot, have ideas for that, how we want to implement that. We'll go into strings. So, yep, as previously stated, I figured it would probably get me about half an hour of content for 2 hours of coding time, which is why we're not coding live, which is why I'm coding off stream, because obviously that takes a good bit longer. And it looks like we are at 20-ish minutes, minus, I don't know, what was it, 6 or 7 minutes that I spent talking about the logo. So, slightly less time than I expected, but we'll see what happens in the future. There's not very much interesting here to talk about because we're just getting set up. So that may be part of it. Future episodes may run longer because I will have actual design decisions to talk about. But it's one of those things. When I'm just creating classes and assigning attributes, there's only just so much to talk about here. So that is that. So, pilot episode in the bag. Anything I want to talk about otherwise? I guess just as a small project to update the gearbox on the Coiler and Cooler. Actually, I probably shouldn't include this just because this is its own series, but since I've already started talking about it, I can't undo time. My solution for it did not work out, so I will be spending the next hour printing up a new solution, and then hopefully that will be the last one, and we can actually put it on air, and hopefully that will be the next video I do. So, besides that, again, I actually probably shouldn't do project updates for this series, and therefore I'll cut myself off now. So anyway, I hope you guys are excited for this series. I hope you guys, well, it's one of those things. First off, make sure to leave a comment on what font you like, because I'm interested to know. Second of all, if you have any questions or ideas, go ahead and put them in the comments, or obviously chat if you end up watching this live stream, future episodes, and we'll talk about them. Otherwise, thank you guys for watching if you have been, and I hope you have a great and wonderful day, afternoon, or evening, wherever you're at in the world, and I will catch you next time.